hopping on a stream here. Just got the Woj bomb. Paul George is going to be declining his player option to test free agency. This essentially closes the door on any trade possibilities for the Clippers. We'll see what happens. I mean, really, there's only two scenarios. He either leaves for cap space or comes back on a deal that I'm assuming will be less than a max. Adam, where are you at with this? I mean, obviously, I think that people, if he was going to go, you don't want him to go for nothing. Do you think that threat of him leaving for nothing is enough for the Clippers to change their stance on where it appears that they've been with a max extension for Paul George?
Yeah, I think you put it perfectly there. At this point, it's either Paul George is coming back for likely 3 years to match up a similar contract with Kawhi Leonard, or he's gone. And I think this says if there is a max out there for him, he's gone. Otherwise, something would have been done by now. I think that's a pretty safe bet at this point. If he can get, as the Clippers deal, it sounds like has been on the table for a while. If he can get the max, if he can get something more than that, which would be 4 years, 212 with teams that have room. He could, if the Clippers were offering, get 4 years, $221 million from them, as you do have the advantage in the inside track with the team trying to retain him. You can make a little bit more, but this is it. We talked about it yesterday. Lucas Hand was in here with us. We did a live stream at around 5. We now got Chuck Mockler in. There is a lot more clarity now, Chuck, with what just happened with Paul George, because as Will mentioned, that trade, that opt-in and trade scenario where he thought he was going to the Golden State Warriors, it's over.
Yeah, I mean, take the Warriors off, and now who are we looking at, right? It's the Magic and the 76ers, and that's it for people who can give him a max.
How many could still create that room, I guess, if they wanted to, through free agency, through guys leaving, through guys being waived, and other teams that have players who ended up opting out and are free agents now, maybe.
Well, are we talking any team or are we talking likely teams? Because I would still be surprised. I would still be surprised if Paul George, I mean, we know that obviously Detroit is clearing a shit ton of cap space right now with the moves they've made today. I still, like, if that was the only max out there, do you guys think he would take that? Because I don't really know about that. Like, is the money that important that he would go to Detroit to play out what is going to be the last like big contract of his career?
I can't imagine that. I think that would be Paul George cares about how he looks, I think, and which is totally fair. Him taking a max in Detroit, I don't think he would do that. I don't think he, like, in good conscience for himself would take a max in Detroit because you're not winning anything.
Do they play
even close?
The right way, like he's been talking about? Do they play the right brand of basketball, which he has said is his priority? This
is also where I'm like, he has no idea what he wants. I don't think. Like, if he wanted to stay on the West Coast, like I said this yesterday, right? Like, oh, he wants to stay on the West Coast. No, he doesn't. He can't be on the West Coast anymore.
Well, it just depends. I think. Yeah, no, the West Coast is pretty much out. I mean, in terms of
Lakers,
like the West Coast is Marcellus Wallaceing Paul George.
Pretty much.
I mean, the Lakers. I think to get Lakers are already $22 million, I believe, over the cap. So I don't know how you get there. In teams that can easily do it right now, right? Like, this isn't accounting for what other trades and stuff could happen in the next couple of days. Obviously right now, Philadelphia, Detroit, Orlando, Utah could all sign him outright. OKC and San Antonio could probably get him outright too. Charlotte with a couple of moves could get there. But that's kind of it. That's kind of it for like signing a full-on max. So I mean, OKC, if he's interested in staying in the Western Conference, would probably be the biggest threat to me if they were able to, if they wanted to take him back, if they were able to take him in. It gets kind of weird with like the development of some of their other wings, but I could see it as a potential move I think Philly has been floated forever.
Chris Haynes just said they are expected to aggressively pursue Paul George, and he's a legitimate threat.
Who's
They're a
Philly?
legitimate threat in luring away him from Los Angeles.
Totally. And like the West
Yeah.
Coast thing, I think that was just something that he said. Paul George, does he mean anything that he says? I really, truly have no idea.
But remember that report that was out there that said, oh, Philadelphia is no longer interested. They're moving on. I never really bought into that.
No,
they didn't wait all this time.
Well, you also don't want it to look like tampering, right? So you can't be like, we've been very interested in Paul George. Like, if you want to do this stuff and you don't want to piss off 29 other GMs, you wait until they decline the option.
For those still wondering, well,
publicly,
what about that sign and trade possibility? The constraints around that, I said this the other day, when you're above the second apron, and granted they could get below it if Paul George leaves, the constraints are like an anaconda constricting you. It's so your margin for error, we talk about it when it comes to games all the times and talented teams, but your margin for error or just that window of opportunity to make a trade happen that's a sign and trade in today's NBA when you're a team above the luxury tax, above the first apron, above the second apron. It's so damn difficult. And by the way, why would Paul George do it at this point to take away assets from the team he's going to? If he's going to Philadelphia and they have the room, it would just be him trying to do the Clippers a solid on the way out, who apparently, from what he said on the podcast, and this was not this week's, but the week before, when I forget the guy next to him, one of his co-hosts, they said, should I continue being...
Yeah.
No. They said...
Jackie. So it was Jackie.
It was Jackie who said... Because he came across the aisle to the Clippers this season and starting to root for them when they got James Harden and everything. He bought all in. He's been a lifelong Laker fan, but he's Paul George's best friend. And this year he declared that he's going to be a Clippers fan. He said on the podcast, should I continue to be a Clippers fan? Basically implying, what are you doing? He was trying to get it out of Paul George. And George hesitated, was like, I don't know. And he had a really tough time with that question. And it just made me think maybe the relationship is a little bit more strained. I think he's pretty direct a lot of the time on the podcast. But I think there's a real chance the schism has been there for some time to get to this point when you were extension eligible at the start of last season.
Yeah, absolutely. We've seen the timeline from Chomayer about, remember how it went from like he was optimistic, or Paul George was optimistic, and then the questions came a little later in the season and he was like, we're working on it, and then he just stopped answering those questions about the contract. So like,
I think that was a little bit mutual though. Like I do think discussion stopped and they opted to focus more on the rest of the season and the playoffs, and then they could kind of resume those conversations, which I think also makes sense.
So the thing now, I guess, is like, does he go to the Sixers? How are we feeling? If the Sixers offer him a max for 4 years, there's no question in my mind he goes there, because the Clippers haven't offered him that. If you haven't been following, it hasn't been there, or he'd be a Clipper.
Would any of this, now that it's likely the Clippers would be losing him for nothing, does that put their feet to the fire or put them over a barrel to have to increase the price? Because
Did you see the law tweet just now?
No.
Pull it up on the screen.
Oh, fuck. I forgot we can do that. All right, one sec. I'm in the middle of moving, which is why I'm disheveled. And I was just trapped in an elevator. So apologies for my trapped in an elevator energy.
Did Keanu Reeves and Jeff Daniels come save you?
No one did.
Shoot the hostage.
Yeah, so La Murray said, sources close to George is not optimistic that he wants to return to the Clippers. He is a legitimate walk threat. Stay tuned. I think he's gone. I think the 76ers are going to offer him, if not the max, they're going to offer him, X amount more than the Clippers. Yeah, it's just going to be more 180. Yeah, and he's going to be gone. I think we're based on this information.
Wait,
so you think three for 180 gets it done, whereas 3 for 150 was clearly not going to get it done?
Yes.
Damn. I don't know about the exact figures, but I think if they offer more, he goes.
$30 million more to play for a place that has Joel Embiid and is also going to be going for a championship this season. Outside of him staying home, I don't know if home is enough to bridge the gap of $30 million.
I don't think the home thing is. It's like the West Coast thing, right? Like that obviously wasn't.
He doesn't care about LA. Come on.
Yeah,
Right.
which is fine, but like I think, I don't know.
No, I think it means something to have his parents at every game and everything. I do think it meant something.
But now I don't.
30
He
million.
makes $50 million a year. They can be at every game, no matter where he plays.
Of course, but I just say it's easier for them.
Absolutely,
his
mom had a
I
stroke.
believe, is disabled. Yeah,
She had a stroke. Yeah,
$30 million more, and you just had the experience of playing at home for 5 years. So it's not like he didn't get that in his career. He may have gotten it out of his system, and now he can go to what some might believe is a better situation at the moment.
Yeah, I mean,
it's not like Joel Embiid doesn't have his own injury concerns, but Tyrese Maxey is a young up-and-coming star in this league that just dropped 50 in a playoff game.
Right.
And while this is like the worst possible outcome for Clippers fans, and I know I have been ragging on Paul George just because I'm kind of sick of him in general, it makes the most sense from his perspective to not opt into 1 year. Even if it would get him to a West Coast team or another contender and be really helping out the team that he's leaving, why would you put that big of a gamble on the last big year, like the last big contract you're ever going to get? If something happens in that 1 year deal, like it's gone, man. Like that 4 year max is off the table. There's no chance. And maybe they could have worked something out in like a handshake deal. If he was traded to Golden State, where they would be like, we're definitely going to extend you for the max. But given like the Harden situations and stuff, I think if you're a player, you've got to be weary of that, especially if you're already 34 years old.
Unless they have some sunk cost fallacy concerns here because they gave up so much to get Paul George, which got them Kawhi Leonard in 2019. I don't see a scenario. Yeah, I don't see a scenario where they're giving him the max at this point.
I think we should address that too, because I think like while there was a lot of smoke around Golden State, and I do think that it made sense, as soon as we saw the report of what they were looking for from the Nuggets, and maybe that was a little bit of a put them over the barrel because they are a competitor in the Western Conference and already a very strong team, the likelihood of a Paul George trade happening, I think, was very, very low. Obviously, just that asking price takes a lot of teams out of the entire equation, but you're looking at multiple firsts plus strong rotation players. For a guy who does only have a year left, like that thing kind of cuts both ways. Like expiring money is good for some teams, but for a person that you want to be a key rotation player that's looking to make max style money, that's not as great for you.
But when you face the possibility now of losing him for nothing rather than getting something back, even if it was less than what you wanted.
Well, the answer is already yes. So yes.
But I mean, were the demands too high in this case?
That's what I'm saying. I think the demands were too high.
So you're saying they mismanaged the trade possibility?
I think they played hardball for sure. And I think that PG was willing to also play hardball and just say, I'm out, which I wasn't fully expecting, but it was a staring contest, and I guess the Clippers must have blinked first or something. Like, this is what PG wanted.
It tells you right now, this partnership that's been going on for a long time, they brought in so many guys to appease Paul George that he wanted. They bend it over backwards and have, as everybody does for their superstars in this league. It's a player empowerment league. It's a star-driven league. You have to do that. The Stars are a franchise unto themselves in many ways. Maybe that played a role here. Like, we did everything you asked us to, and in that playoff series, he averaged 19 points when they didn't have Paul George. And the frustration, yes, of not having not having Kawhi Leonard again is almost a side note to me. I understand that's the reality of it and may have played some factor. Here we go again. But Paul George being paid as a superstar, has to put up more than 15 shots per game in that series, regardless of if Kawhi's there or not.
And that's kind of why I think that even given the possibility of him walking for nothing, I think to me the least likely scenario is the Clippers cave and end up offering him the max.
Yeah, that was never gonna. Yeah, that was never gonna happen. This is an interesting point by Jeffrey Beltran that I think some other people thought too. Is once Westbrook opted in, he was going to too. Thought they were leaving together to the same team. I guess not anymore. Russ seems, as of right now, still on the team, but I don't know about that. Someone asked, do we think this changes Harden's trajectory?
No.
You think he's back? Everyone's been saying he's been back.
There's no way they're not going to offer him whatever it takes to stay after you just gave up one of your last two picks in the first round, the 2028. They have the 2030 still to get him just a year ago, and he played really well for them and provided the best regular season stretch. Was a workhorse, provided the best regular season stretch, or it was a huge part of them going 26-5 in the history of the franchise. It was great in the first round, or their best player at least.
3 for 150, I think James Harden's coming back, or 3 for 120. I think he's for sure coming back. And he doesn't want to go back to Philly, right?
And let's not act like it sounded like it didn't sound like Paul George was intimating that style of basketball with James Harden wasn't his thing. I don't know why it wouldn't be when you got to play off ball and be hyper efficient like that and be Michael Porter Jr. on steroids and you were winning. I understand they went through a couple of months where they were about a 500 team, also coincided with the fact that Paul George didn't look like himself those 2 months and looked to be playing through injury. Maybe, and I alluded to this at the time, because it's a contract year. He knew he had to play through all this stuff. He had a knee issue. He had a groin issue. He was going to play through it, and he came out of it and looked great and had the game winner over Jonathan Isaac at the end of the regular season in Orlando. But I think all that stuff, has led us to this point. It's just a multitude of factors throughout this season that has got us here.
Yeah. I don't know. It's weird. It's a weird ending. It feels like a very slow burn to the end of the 2-1-3 era.
So what's the upshot if he leaves for nothing regarding maneuvering and what they'd have to play with now being under the second apron?
So if PG goes, this is per Lucas Han, if PG goes to the Sixers, Clippers could have the opportunity to use the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception and toe the line of the first apron hard cap.
So, more maneuvers for sure.
More maneuvers to be had for sure.
Is that going to be like $14 million?
That's the taxpayer mid-level?
Non-taxpayer mid-level.
So that's like what, 13-ish?
Something like that, yeah.
It's hard for me to tell with the cap going up, but it's got to be
it's like
in the 13 to 15 range.
Yeah, let's call it
if the Suns got Royce O'Neal for like 11 mil a year, that's a solid, very, very solid role player.
That's an Isaiah Hartenstein.
From what I'm seeing,
scenario, it's Isaiah Hartenstein.
From what I'm seeing, Will, you're dead on. $13 million.
Cap head. If you have any cap questions, tweet at Will Updike.
Oh, please don't. Ask Lucas Han.
Suck it, Bobby Marks.
So we're kind of in the death whales of 2-1-3, kind of. It feels like
we've talked about this a lot. For them to have success coming into this season, even if Paul George was there, we still all felt like one of the young guys has to pop and have a breakout year. Bones, Kobe Brown, Kai Jones now, Jordan Miller, Brandon Boston's gone. Somebody
Cam
had
Christie
to
season, baby.
Now it's even more critical for that to happen. Which goes back to Russell Westbrook opting in. How is Bones getting playing time still if they're going to have Russ and James Harden? Do you believe Russell Westbrook is going to be
I hope not, man. I still hope that maybe this is part of a move. Like, I think that losing Paul George and keeping Russ is probably the doomsday worst case scenario for me.
Yeah. Did we talk about the Spurs maybe signing PG?
Yeah, I mean, I said that they
Yeah.
could sign him. I said that they have the cap space.
Could be interesting.
I don't think they would because timeline-wise, it still doesn't make them a contender. With Philadelphia, it could put them over the top. With the San Antonio
If you don't have to
Spurs,
give, like, I mean, they offer a meeting for sure. If you don't have to give up any assets, why would you not? You know what I mean? They have the
34.
cap space. If it doesn't work out, I mean, you can flip him, or Wemby will still be in the prime of his career once that contract is off the books.
George said he doesn't feel like PG's leaving, which that doesn't make any sense to me, but
Like,
happy you feel
look,
that way, George.
unless he's changed his stance on max years, max money, I don't know.
the only way
If
to
he was willing to take less, though, I don't think it would have come down to the wire like this. I don't see any reason why he would have,
why would you
it would take
prolong
so
the inevitable?
Right.
The only way I could see him not leaving is if Philadelphia now plays hardball and says, well, we don't have to give him the max. Like, nobody else is actually going to do it, and we're the only ones that he thinks are going to do it. Maybe we just give him what the Clippers were offering because we think he's so scorned by that situation, we can get him for 150 now. And then Paul George says, well, forget that.
If he walks to Philly for 3 for 150, Paul George can go to hell. I would burn it. I don't have a Paul George jersey, but I would burn it.
That's LeBron leaving the Cavs in 2010 type.
Dude, like, F
jersey
you.
burning.
You're going to take the same amount of
If
money
you
to go
took
to
the
Philly.
same
I hope
amount
you
of
get
money.
hit with a battery.
If he took the same amount of money, dude, people would be furious at PG. And he'll announce it on his pod. We'll know about it when he does his podcast episode to announce where he's signing.
The decision.
The decision 0.10.
The indecision.
0.005.
Yeah. Man, this is
I'd just like to say I don't sign off on what Will just said, and it's not because of the police sirens.
Oh yeah, I got to mute. Sorry.
It's all right, Chuck. We're good.
Oh, good. Somebody in the comments says they have 2 Paul George jerseys. So if we get that 3 for 150, I'll have one to burn. Thank you, George.
Will has the Drew League Hannah has the Drew League Paul George jersey, which is too nice of a jersey to burn.
She likes it though, so I'm not gonna take that from her.
She likes Paul George.
I, for one, not regardless, I want to see how it plays out, but most likely I will still be a fan of PG-13. He helped get them to further place than they had ever been before.
Absolutely.
When everyone was piling on after what happened in the bubble and saying, oh, Kawhi's out. Well, this is done. They're taking on the Utah Jazz, the number 1 seed, and they're about to go to Utah for Game 5. And playoff P is going to choke. And then he had the best playoff game of his life. And while you can point to Terrence Mann and the 39 points he had in Game 6, I think Paul George had something like 32, and they're all loading up to stop Paul George, which is why Terrence Mann got so many wide open shots like that.
He did a lot of great things. Like, no one can – I mean, there were some great highs with Paul George. There was some good stuff. And then at the end, it became messy and gross, unfortunately, which would be even messier and grosser if he went to Philadelphia for 3 for 150.
I'm sorry I brought up that possibility now.
Adam, what the hell, man? I was just stuck in an elevator. Now I got to think about that.
What are their taxes compared to California? Is he looking at that situation, or
I don't know.
If he's worried about the tax liability, he should sign outright in Orlando. That is financially the best bang for his buck.
I do. That fit for them's perfect. He's exactly what they need to take that next step. Yeah. After losing in that Game 7 to the Cavs in the first round, they just do not have enough scoring whatsoever. We got Pat for this guy, just for him to walk. Carlos
got a lot of guys for this guy.
Someone's asking why we hate Russ so much. In the right situation, he's not in the right situation, so he's not great. Stop talking about
how
Russ.
Many different situations have we tried
sucks
at this
right
point
now?
Let's see.
Shoot.
He was bottom 5 in percentage of rim attacks and bottom 5 in 3-pointers and 3-point efficiency. What no one hates Russ. I'm just asking, what exactly does he thrive at the age of 35 and 36? He's a much older player than he was. You're going to say energy. I'm going to say execution's much more important than that. And I think Bones Highland, young guys have to get shots for this Clippers season to be a success. They need young guys to step up, and to do that, they have to get an opportunity. The only way for that to happen is some of these vets clear the way. Obviously, more minutes now if Paul George is out. But somebody else also has to find a role on this team that's a younger guy that can play 80 games.
Yes, I absolutely agree. Now some questions are popping up. Someone asked, did OKC win the trade?
They already did, but that happened.
You still
they essentially won the trade in 2021 when Kawhi got injured. Like it doesn't really even have as much to do with Paul George as like the injury history, and no way to foresee that really.
Well, and that will be the line of demarcation should Paul George leave in the 2-1-3 era to be over. It will be looked back upon in history as ending really at that point. That's what changed everything, unfortunately, for the Clippers.
Do we think the FO thinks Kawhi is tradable now? I think Kawhi is hanging out. I don't know if Kawhi.
I think that is 100% up to him and his timeline is what the front office is going to do.
And he wants.
How do you think Kawhi reacts to this?
I think he's known.
Did Paul George leave?
I think he looks at his phone and he goes, and then it's back to business.
I think he's known. I mean, it can't have been that secret with like how long these trade discussions are going on. And if the clear line in the sand is I want 4 for 220 or whatever it is, then the outcome I guess is pretty obvious.
I think they've acquiesced to the stars
from day one
as much as you can.
Yes,
I think anything could be on the table. Because it's still dependent on Kawhi Leonard being able to hold up, which just hasn't happened over the last 4 seasons. Now, you can make the argument then, what are you getting for him if somebody inquired or if the Clippers made him available because they're going to look at this as the start of a teardown if Paul George leaves? I don't know, but it's just things have gone. The old meme, you're probably wondering how I ended up here.
Right.
That's where we're at right now. Unfortunately, if it wasn't for bad luck, the Clippers would have none at all, it feels like, at the moment with how this era has gone. And I don't blame them one bit because every GM in the history of basketball would have made the exact same move. Everybody. Yeah. The ceiling for SGA at that time, the unanimous ceiling was all-star, not top 3 MVP candidate. It wasn't close to that. Credit to him. The guy has worked his ass off, and that's what he became this season.
The Orlando Magic also just waived $8 million in Mo Wagner's contract, so that could be. I don't want to read the tea leaves too much, but that could be an indication that they're looking to create some even more cap space to perhaps add some further depth after Paul George signing.
Good fit for Orlando as well. Paul George can go there, and they're a bigger team. He doesn't have to do as much physicality because they have young guys doing that. For Paul George, that's a good fit.
He and Ben Carroll. Yeah. They'd be a threat to be, I don't know, a 4 or 5, which is where they were, I think, this year they ended up. Because this is the best on paper the East has looked since 1998 when Michael Jordan was still in the league.
I think they could get to 3.
If things broke their way, yeah. I agree with you. They still have guys who are getting better, young players who are ascending.
We have people in the chat kind of talking about like, are the Clippers going to like scrap the roster and try and get what they can? The roster is not like scrappable. Like there's not guys on this team that people are breaking down the door to trade for. We saw it in the playoffs. This team had 6 playoff able guys. You got the starting 5, then you have Norm. And like, you know, Amir's maybe on the list. Obviously, PJ Tucker wasn't good enough. Like, this isn't a roster that's like, oh, we don't have Paul George anymore. Let's make some moves and really bring someone in. Like, it's not a very good roster on the whole.
I mean, honestly, opening
to do
up
that.
Opening up the non-taxpayer mid-level exemption is a good start. And
Absolutely.
Then yeah, I mean, I agree with you 100%, Charles. Like, you don't have the wealth of assets that you once did in terms of players and depth.
We don't have Rocco and Batum and all these guys.
Yeah, so like really what the Clippers are looking at is shedding additional salary and hoping to get free agents, which I still do think with the new arena and everything, it is an attractive enough place. Wow, what about that too? I mean, does Ballmer step in and say that we're willing to go for we're willing to go max with the arena opening? Like, does that change anything if now the options are gone for nothing or returns on a deal that is more favorable to Paul George versus more favorable to the team?
That's interesting. It could, if they feel that level of desperation to keep this group together, if they feel that the 26-5 run was more representative than what we saw the couple months after that, and they feel that Kawhi is going to be healthy again.
Well, that's the other thing too, is like Kawhi is part of this thing, like for better and for worse. I mean, in terms of for Paul George, it definitely took away his leverage when Kawhi signed his deal. But also, I mean, you're hesitant to give PG a max. I mean, yes, his performance has had issues. It's also had really great highs, but you just can't afford to pay a max to a guy if the other star, if you're not sure that the other star is going to be around. And that, I mean, that's a tough break for both players, but like it does make PG's situation a little bit more difficult in terms of having like negotiation leverage.
I want to talk about Vince Cunningham real quick.
We brought it up at the beginning.
This guy's a fucking idiot. He's not. The Clippers aren't giving him a max, Vince. Do your research, you absolute jackass. The offer hasn't been on the table. Why are we pretending like the Clippers are just going to give him a max now? They haven't been. If the Clippers do give him a max, then the front office has some serious questions and needs to look in the mirror, because that would be absolutely crazy.
Well, Will's point was it's not about the front office then at that point. It's about ownership wanting to make sure that they have an elite competitive team going into next season with championship expectations at Intuit Dome. But I think Ballmer and the front office are so tight. My guess, just reading tea leaves, is like
everyone's reading tea leaves today.
For it to get here, they already have a plan. They're not going to all of a sudden overreact. They knew this could happen. They're not all of a sudden going to overcompensate and go back to, well, we didn't know Paul George could actually just leave and we can lose him for nothing. And they're going to panic and give him the max all of a sudden.
He can opt out. They're freaking out.
I mean, that, you know, it was a gamble and a risk that they were clearly willing to take, like that they could lose and lose. I mean, like that's it. They could get absolutely nothing back and lose a player of Paul George's caliber. We
said it yesterday. We all believe they would rather lose him for nothing than give him the max. We all believed that yesterday. And it may be playing out just like that. Lucas believed it too.
Lucas believed it too.
But to your point on the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, the one thing you could get with that is what they did, I believe, with Nicholas Batum, which is you give Guy a lesser contract, and I think he got the veteran minimum, but you give Guy the lesser deal that's worth more than $13 million, but with the understanding that then we'll get your bird rights, then we'll sign you to the long-term deal afterwards. There is that carrot to dangle with guys.
Mm-hmm.
If they want to be a Clipper, if they want to come here, obviously there has to be something favorable you're selling on with them on to get them for $13 million, to get them under what their real true value would be on the market.
Yes.
Just throwing it out there.
No, you're not. You're not wrong. I think that, I mean, and they're going to figure something out. There's a lot of people in the chat upset at the front office, and I don't know what to tell you. I don't know.
Dude, they should have known Kawhi was going to miss 222 games when he became a Clipper, and Paul George would miss 130. They should have known. Everybody said it when they brought him in 2019 that that's what was going to happen, right? I mean, it was obvious. All the people in our comments, they were all saying it then. Everybody on Twitter was saying it then. Like, what are you guys doing? These guys are going to be injured half the time. Oh, wait, no one said that.
A lot of people say he's going to the Knicks. I'm being called back into moving action, so I have to pop out. But keep going, and everyone keep listening to these guys because they're very smart.
The Knicks.
Yeah. What do we? How do we want to wrap this up? Adam? Like, what do you want to dig into now?
I guess most likely scenario at this point. Just given what's occurred and transpired now today, what do you think happens with the Clippers and Paul George? Is it for sure over? Where does he go in your mind?
I would say more likely than not, it's over. With him going to I just think he ends up going. I think he does end up going to the Eastern Conference. I think Philly makes the most sense given like the age of their roster and stars. Obviously, Max is kind of on a different timeline, but it makes a little bit more sense. I like the fit in Orlando. I think that would be good. I don't know if he would do that one, but those are the two most likely scenarios. Like I said, OKC could get there to sign him. I don't know about that. That would be the funniest possible situation, though, if they got all these assets plus Shea for Paul George, and then they later outright signed him. That would be that'd be some pretty dirty business. Not that they did it on purpose, but that would hurt.
What else would hurt is what I think is going to happen. They're going to get Isaiah Hartenstein, OKC, and put him at the 5 with Chet at the 4, and that is a juggernaut right there if they weren't already. My best guess is he goes to Philly, that they're going to give him, if not the max, 180, 190, something that the Clippers were not offering. And I'll say this didn't come from anyone inside the Clippers organization. I did hear something before the season that Paul George was absolutely geared up to try to get a max contract, which is what we heard from Justin Rousseau on a recent podcast here with us, that understandably, your lifetime's very short as an athlete. The money was very important to him, and that is absolutely fine in my book, because you only have 15 years, a little bit more than that if you're lucky, to make your living, and then it's over as an athlete. So get as much as you can while you can.
Yeah, and I mean it's not an insignificant amount of money, because it's like 50 to 60. It could be 50 to 60 million dollars. Like, it's not, it's we're not talking about even 10 or 12 million, which is still like an insane amount of money, of course.
Because this is his last. This isn't a guy who's 30 that could still squeak out another 3-year deal after this. This is likely it, and then maybe he's like a veteran minimum guy chasing a ring somewhere.
Yeah, he's a mid-level or a vet man guy at that point.
So I will not begrudge him at all if that's what it's about.
Before we get out of here, what for you is what's the lasting legacy of Paul George in the 2-1-3 era, and Paul George with the Clippers?
I think it's an NBA what if story. Another one. I think it's like Penny and Shaq. I think it's like T-Mac and Grant Hill. Even guys like, what if Antonio McDyess never did his knee? Or it's a sports type of tragedy when guys are in their prime and get hurt in their prime. To me, it always is that, when you never get to see the maximum potential of, in this case, a duo, but even just individually, and especially because if 2-1-3 is over, they weren't able to bring the Clippers their first championship. And that was obviously the goal and why you make that move. And unfortunately, just so many things have gone against them that were outside of their control. The things outside of their control by far are what have kept the Clippers from not winning a championship in this era. If Kawhi doesn't do his knee in 2021, they're winning the championship in my book. I saw what he did to Giannis Antetokounmpo in the 2019 Eastern Conference Finals. They would have beat the Bucks, and obviously, you take the Suns to 6 without him, you're beating them.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, this whole thing, we're not even having this conversation about like, I don't even think that the max is as big of a factor for Paul George, like had they gotten one in this 2-1-3 era. Like, I think that might change the calculus a little bit. And then obviously, you know, if they had won one, it's not even a question for it's not even a question for the front office to re-sign a guy for the max. Like, that's, you know, that's more than enough. If you brought one home, that's more than enough for I think to do that even for a 34-year-old player.
Yeah.
But for me, I mean, like, it'll definitely be it's definitely a what if, and it'll be the highs of, you know, making the first Western Conference final. It'll be the highs of seeing those guys together. And yeah, I don't know. Like, I know that I've expressed a lot of negative stuff about Paul George, but it's just due to the situation and how this kind of thing has all shaken out.
I would like to offer some hope, just because I always do at the end of shows, and this one has been especially negative, understandably. I really look at the Clippers as BB before Ballmer and AB after Ballmer. This franchise, in many ways, of being a legitimate, credible, viable franchise, has only been around for 10 years since Steve Ballmer took over in 2014. And they have, if you look at it from that perspective, they have made so many strides. Because before that, they had an owner who did not care about winning at all. How could you call it a real franchise? They were being called the worst franchise in all of sports. In many ways, they're just getting started since 2014. And as unfortunate as this era, and even you can say Lob City, of course, to an extent, has been, you have Steve Ballmer. You have Steve Ballmer. If ownership is the biggest advantage in sports, you have, if not the best, which I think he is one of the best, because he's already shown what he's willing to do.
Yeah, that's a positive note. We're going to get out of here. Thank you so much to everybody who tuned in. If you didn't know, we're Clips and Dip. You can check us out on youtube.com at Clippers Podcast. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcasts. But yeah, thank you everybody who tuned in to the live, and until next time.